London?
Well, we're in Manchester way.
Manchester, yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody from the United States says London and United Kingdom, but you're here. I am an M&A advisor. So what I help is I help clients buy, sell companies, and I work with entrepreneurs who are looking to retire and sell their companies. So a lot of my questions are really centered and focused around an exit. You obviously accomplished an extraordinary exit in your career as one of the things that you've accomplished, but I wanted to kind of start and ask you a little bit more detailed questions on the business itself. When Reebok went from 9 million to 900 million in 4 years, that's just extraordinary growth in just 4 years. How did you accommodate all of the different supply chain issues? How were you able to grow from 9 million to 900 million? A lot of our clients went through COVID and went through this stage of supply chain constraints. But 9 million to 900 million, that's a whole different level. So just dying to ask you that question.
Well, Dennis, you've just hit the nail on the head. That that was I don't know, it was horrendous. Just the biggest challenge. It was the biggest challenge. We pivoted. We arrived at aerobics, and that was the biggest pivot of entire existence, because we fell into something from being a smallish running company of 9 million. All of a sudden, we discovered aerobics, and that threw, I wouldn't say turmoil, but it threw us into the cauldron where we really found ourselves with two problems. Initially, it was the finance, but we soon got that fixed, and once we got the flow moving, that was okay. But it's a lot of money. But yes, the biggest problem we had, and not found the answer. I think that Reebok may not have made it to number one, or may not have made it to be a global brand the way it is today. Because the biggest problem, we didn't recognize at the time, but moving from a running company to a woman's company, and this was the first shoe ever made specifically for women in the sporting area and fitness. And once we got Jane Fonda, she went out and bought a pair and used them in her videos. This accelerated what was already beginning to grow rather fast. Started off in LA, and that was a real hotbed. And our biggest problem, of course, was we couldn't really sell anything else because we couldn't get anything else. Our total production was absorbed. Totally.
How were you managing just to keep such a huge driven demand for your product? I mean, how long did it produce the product, ship it in? Like, what was your sales cycle from the time that you got the product in to the time that you sold? You must have been financing a lot of that production on your end.
Well, what happened, and this is why I really accepted that if Reebok was going to grow, it needed to get a lot of cash.
Right.
So that was the time when I brought other people in. And what the real financing was, the guy who came to back the company gave us a credit line. He was a sourcing company in South Korea, which is excellent because we needed to source a lot of product, and then he gave us a credit line, and there was no top to the credit line. He just left it open, so we had open credit, and we were working with things happened that were really fortuitous for Reebok there, and the biggest one that happened was that Nike they're finding themselves with too much inventory. They had to pull out of about 4 factories in South Korea, just at the time when, if we hadn't have had that production availability, we would have starved our market. And if we'd have starved our market, in would have come Nike, Adidas, and probably others. I know that Nike and Adidas had stood back saying, "Nah, this is women. This won't happen. This is women. It's going to be a fad. It'll be over within 6 months." Yeah. As it happened, it stayed there for 4 years, very big, and is still quite a big part of the Reebok.
This is what you define in your book as the white space.
Yes.
Within those parameters, and I love the way that you looked at the niches and you found the growth, and then overtook the majority of the market for everything else. That was genuine. But the inventory is definitely the issue, and the clients that we represent, they're having inventory issues as well, just like Nike had issue when you were at on your beginning stage of rise. A lot of clients also were so devastated by not having enough inventory during COVID that now they have so much inventory that is really becoming an issue on the upside. So you definitely take advantage of the situation in time. And I know I believe you exited at the late 80s and stepped away from your role. But have you ever thought about an exit point for yourself? Have you ever envisioned selling your company or selling a share of your business? Have all of those conversations ever been around your circle?
I think not too much exiting, but certainly in the earlier days, we looked around to see if we could find an investor.
Yeah,
But we didn't have angels. We didn't have VCs.
right.
The situation has totally changed. In our early days in business, people didn't seem to be looking. They would go onto the stock market if they
Yeah,
wanted to invest money. But investing, startup companies in particular, not many people had an after.
yeah,
But so we did look around and we got one or two people looking at us. But as I say, the history wasn't there, the system wasn't there. There was nothing there that convinced them that this is what you do. This is what entrepreneurs can put money in and help a business to grow and then exit.
yeah.
So we struggled in those early days.
Have you looked into growing the company by acquiring, maybe strategically acquiring either a company that would produce your product or a similar company that would you can enter into the market rather than acquire the sales?
Well, we of course started with a very small factory.
Right.
Was okay, but once we recognized the fact that we moved away from being a manufacturer as such into being a marketing company, we didn't want to own that sort of business, a manufacturing company. We didn't want to do that. That would probably divert spending, divert attention. So whilst we had a production side to Reebok, they were just people who knew how to produce, would go and would handle the factories, would go over there and really make sure that our designs were produced exactly as we wanted. So
Yeah.
we only had that area to cost into the product. We preferred it that, and I don't know whether it was naive on behalf of Reebok, but we did get the people who were actually in the, we'll say the side of the sales side,
Hmm.
that they used to look at it as though, oh, it doesn't really matter if we want 5 million this month, we need 7 million the month, but only 3 million the month after. Okay, they would put that to the factory, not realizing the fact that the factory can't turn from 5 million to 3 million unless they're going to lay off people or cut down the factory production. So what the factories did, they just added everything together, divided it by 3 or 4, whatever months you were going to do it, and just made it. And then, of course, our team would say, "Oh, just a minute, we overthought this month. We didn't want 5."
Yeah.
The production still kept going. So
Did you always have two different production manufacturing facility, or were you committed to one to drive the cost down, right? Or were you try to be redundant in creating two different facility sources?
well, one could never cope with
Right.
it. One could never have product, and so we would have 3 or even 4 factories that you would go into. The factories worked on production lines, and one production line could produce, I don't know whether it was something like 250 a day on one line. So you had to buy one line, or buy 2 lines, or buy 3 lines. So you went up that way. You wanted 1,000 a day, and so getting the production and having it arrive at the right time. I mean, we were just so hungry. Any production that we could get arrive in the USA in particular, because that's where we decided that the market was USA. We'll concentrate on USA. We did actually starve a lot of the rest of the world. We starved it, but the fact that we were actually just about keep up with demand in the USA, it saved it. We retained the position of being the leader in aerobics and shoes. So
Yeah.
we had some fairly hairy moments able to manage that demand.
Yeah.
it was fairly difficult, but we actually managed it.
Your career, I think, in the United States really took off when you somebody in Boston, which is where I am. So we're
All
kind
right.
of taking a step. And I believe Reebok of United States was headquarters for a long time in Boston as well, in Canton, Massachusetts as well.
It still is
Still
headquartered in
is.
Boston, but it's now at Dry Dock. Is it Dry
Yeah.
Dock? Yes, now at Dry Dock. The reason they moved to Dry Dock, at least the story goes, the reason they moved to Dry Dock is that it was difficult to get people to work out at Canton. Canton
Yeah.
was a beautiful facility, but to
Yeah.
get people to come out to Canton and work, youngsters don't want that anymore.
They
So
don't want to work in general. So right as Reebok was taking off, and you were working with your brother. Your brother was concentrating on the production
mm,
end of things, and I know that unfortunately he passed away at a very young age, but he was still a partner in the business. So yes, as a family, it was a horrific situation, but also it left the business in a very hard place. I work with clients that sometimes undervalue that the potential of that catastrophic issue when the two partners, the two brothers, or any family dynamics are in the business. How did you deal with that occurrence? It must have been a humongous blow, obviously personally, but also for the business.
well, I mean, it was a massive tragedy, and it was
Yeah.
a question of you have to get on with life. You have
Yeah.
to get on with the business. Just can't sit down with your head in your hands and just worry about it. Um,
Did you have anything in place in terms of agreements of what will happen if one partner passes away? How did it protect the business? Was there anything in that time, or should
there,
have
there
there
was,
been something?
no, there was nothing in place at that time. We didn't envisage that. I mean, these are the sort of things as a business gets slightly bigger than we were. Maybe we would have looked a legal situation whereby we could write things down. I mean, as it happened that whilst Jeff and I really got on well together, we worked very well as partners, and Jeff looked after the factory. He loved making shoes. And if you've read my book, you'll realize I don't like making shoes. It's a bit too repetitive for me, and I could go to sleep making shoes, and that didn't really fit in with what I wanted to do. So we had different areas to work in, and I was the one working on marketing, sales, and a few more things. So everything else, and Jeff looked after the factory. So my first problem. Well, I'd say it's my first problem. At that time, we were just about to enter in America with 3 5-star shoes, which meant
Right.
that we would want we want to increase production. Also, we were the fact that we needed to get a better price to go into America, which meant that we had to look
Asia.
to Asia.
Yeah.
So we were already looking there. And I was working with Barter. Barter were down in near London in the UK. They had a massive factory, and they would help. They would produce first product for the USA. They would produce that. The fact that they got it wrong, the fact they made a lot of mistakes. That's one of the reasons one of the reasons did make mistakes is unfortunately Jeff did die. Otherwise, he would have gone down to Tilbury, which is just
Yeah.
east of London, and he would have overlooked
Check the
that
quality.
just quality and production. But as it happened, I had to train up one of the people. He eventually became to work for us, Paul Brown. So, but by the time, and the amount of time I could spend with him was insufficient to really have that product perfectly come off the production line. But at the same time, I had been talking to the agent of the biggest in that time the biggest factory in South Korea, and they were producing samples. But that takes some time. So we were caught in between, not quite ready to go to Korea, and if we had have been ready, again, Jeff would have made that trip.
Right.
He
Right.
I made it as it happened, so I could sort of see what was going on. We would have probably both gone in the first place, but then
Right.
Jeff would have had to take over that role of looking after that production. As it happened, the Koreans got it right.
Right.
They got it right. Right
Yeah.
from the beginning, they got it right.
Because you mentioned that you've had issues with the production that were coming out of the UK that you had to
Yes.
do. There was a lot of things, and obviously it was good to have a backup plan that sufficiently covered all the shortcomings. When we're thinking about an exit, and you exited out of the company, out of your leadership role in the late 80s, and then the company was sold to Adidas in later on. You as a company ambassador is really heavily involved with the company. What did you think of that sale as it went on? I mean, obviously you were the number one. The Reebok was number one all across the board, and you were definitely a competitor that needed to be taken away. What did you think? Were you involved in some of these conversations when we were evaluating the brand strategy moving forward with the acquisition? Obviously, it's a ridiculous amount of money. I mean, it was crazy number back then.
Yeah,
Uh,
it was a crazy number. Not many people were thinking in those sort of numbers. There is a slight sort of difference in the process that you talk about. What happened is that when I stepped back from the company, we were number one,
yeah,
and we stayed number one till sometime into the 90s. Good, but at that point, Reebok seemed to whatever sales or wherever they're looking, Reebok plateaued, and just on. And at that point, Nike had taken off again. Adidas had taken off again. So Nike had overtaken Reebok again, and
mhm,
even Adidas had overtaken Reebok. So by the time Reebok was sold to Adidas, we had been stagnating at something like 3.5 to 4 billion, whereas I think Adidas had got to 6 or 7 billion, and Nike was near 9 or 10 billion. So they had come back. Reebok has stagnated. Now people tell us many reasons. People say we were overselling product instead of making it a bit,
right,
keeping people a bit hungry. There are a
right.
number of reasons, but the company changed around. A lot of
Do you think it's the lack of innovation in the company that all of a sudden everybody was focused on selling and really forgot the white space and forgot to innovate?
yes, I think that's what happened. We had too many changes. So many people came in to be CEO that really, one of the guys put it that Reebok had more, I think he said presidents, that whether they came as presidency, more CEOs than a country in Latin America. And then he changed his mind to say, no. They had more presidents than all the countries in Latin America. And I think that more or less summed it up, is the fact that lost that sort of direction because of too many people. And when people come in at the top, Paul Fireman, he had stepped back a bit. I think Paul Fireman had just taken over president and sort of somebody else doing CEOs. So there was a lack of consistency, should
Right.
I say. It's like, it was like planting the tree and keep on looking at the roots. Keep it. Something was going wrong at that point with direction.
Do you think when companies try to add more products to their core product base, because obviously everybody wants to grow revenue and you can only
Mm-hmm.
grow revenue so many ways with one product line. Do you think that hurts the overall growth? Obviously, adding more products is a good thing, but do you think they had too many products that they were offering? Because I think they were going into selling even gym equipment at some levels, like
Yes,
steps.
they you can sort of spread yourself too thin. And unless you've got good direction at the top, I think that can be the reason, probably the reason why Reebok started to plateau. And once it got to a certain point, I think the feeling was Feynman, and from well, I think it's Feynman because the company had already bought out Stephen Rubin, who was the man who supplied all the cash for us. So I think the board came to the conclusion that if we can find a buyer, let's find a buyer. I know one or two people were very upset at that fact, and but it happened. Sold out to Adidas. And then of course they paid a lot of money, the company, and
They also was interesting. Their acquisition was interesting, as they said, we don't plan to do anything, right?
yeah,
Which really meant we're just gonna leave it the way it is, and that company was at the core. So they felt like they just left it and thought it'll do good by it. What do you think was the whole point of this acquisition? They just not sold it back to I think at 2.6 billion or some
They were
crazy
very
number.
fortunate. That was well over the perspective. People didn't expect that sort of money because the revenue had gone down from just 3.6 nearly 4 billion. The revenue had gone down to 1 billion. So it was 25% of the size of the company they bought. But I mean, it's pretty obvious that Adidas paid a lot of money because they wanted a bigger share of the American market. And Reebok had a nice big basketball and American football. So they just transferred the agreements to Adidas. And it did help Adidas, but that's all they wanted. Adidas, they did buy a few companies. They had a few companies, but Adidas were not good at multi companies. They didn't have a and just say, okay, here's a holding company. Now, each of you companies, you've got to fight. They just seem to, in fact, they put Reebok into Adidas so much, into every office, everything was joined together. So that when it came along, or when Adidas was selling the company, it took 12, 18 months to separate them once the deal had been done, because every office, there was a small sort of amount of people who were working for Reebok, but it was so everything had been by Adidas. And Adidas, no, they didn't do Reebok any good because they just allowed it to dwindle away. And I mean, I met 2 or 3 people who were interested in buying the brand when Adidas decided to put it up for sale. And they were all talking about, well, yeah, worth $1 billion, maybe 1.25 billion. And then when ABG came up and said 2.5 and bought it for 2.5, it was like, what? Everybody, they were stunned. But
I think they'll do a good job.
ABG knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
Shaq, who loves the Reebok brand,
Yep.
it's
From day
15.
one. He's a
Yeah,
Reebok fan from day one.
that's right. He was 15% of ABG and just he loved it. And now he's president of the basketball
Yeah.
basketball and starting to build it again.
Joe, do you have designs for sneakers that were never published that maybe you and I can partner up and design a new shoe? Do you have any of those designs that are somewhere stored in your category of shoes that will one day be?
Unfortunately, no, because whilst I designed the 5-star shoes and that was okay back in the 70s, we've moved on.
Yeah.
Materials have moved on. The whole manufacturing has moved on. One of the reasons I stepped back was that, okay, at that time, I had a role. I was more or less ambassador, and I was going around the world 3 times a year. Didn't know why I was doing this. There was no challenge left for me, so that's why I backed out. But you build a lot of who are designers, a lot of designers, a lot of accountants, a lot of legal, and a lot of people in between.
A
So for
lot
me,
different than when you started
yeah,
it.
that's right. So different that to me there was really no challenge left anymore. Better for me to back out. And I think this is what happens to successful companies. They grow to a size that really you need a really big team. And if you get a good big team and a lot of good people at the top, you will keep moving. And I think with ABG, they have a different system. They license the brand out to major retailers globally. And in fact, this year, we've been invited by a number of those people with licenses now. We're down in Australia. We've been to Canada. We've been to Panama. We've been to a lot of the new distribution, and they're all keen.
Yeah.
And this is good. So, and one thing, after writing the book, one of the good things is a lot of these companies now, they're buying books for employees
Yeah.
because they can now learn where the company came from. So it's turned out to be a good thing having written the
Well,
book.
I mean, it's so important that to keep that same kind of in the firm that innovated it from the beginning. I mean, you can't achieve 900 million dollar growth in 4 years, really keeping the culture of brand recognition together. Joe, I really appreciate your time. Really enjoyed the book. Obviously, recommend it highly. You've achieved a lot in the exit. Anything you would have differently as a final question? Now that I mean, obviously, I'm sure you've been at it many times, but from the standpoint of exit planning and preparing for that day where you step down from the acting president CEO of the company, anything you would have done differently?
Well, I think we were in a different era. I mean,
Right.
today when we go around to universities and we meet the MBAs or the executive MBA students there, the first question they ask is, "What's your exit plan, Joe?" And
Yes.
exit plan. We didn't have an exit plan, and
We only have enter plan. We only had the plan to enter.
and it seems to me now that a lot of businessmen take a great deal of notice of
Yes.
constructing and exiting businesses. They take a lot of notice. We didn't have that. We didn't have any of that. I don't think you could find a business book in the 60s and 70s. You couldn't find a business book. Nobody would talk to you about that. What you picked up was probably from your accountant. Sometimes the bank would advise a bit, but mainly the lawyers would advise. But there were no entrepreneurs to advise you. People who've done this, people who can work the way around the business. So we didn't have that. And it was a surprise to me because I wrote the book. I wrote the book after stepping back. We didn't have computers when I stepped back. 1990, we didn't have a computer. We didn't have a phone. So
Right.
and only when I'm sort of enjoying myself in the sun a bit in Tenerife, and then I'm reading. We got computers, and we got Wikipedia, and we got Google, and they tell me how Reebok was started. I'm reading this, and there's even a photograph of Joe Foster, and I'm reading and thinking, no, that didn't happen that way.
That's not me.
So that inspired me to write the book.
Yeah.
And then once we published it, people are ringing me and saying, Joe, this is a book. It's a good story, but it's a business book.
Yeah.
What you did from nowhere, but you went through all those problems and challenges, and you came through those challenges, and that's people need to read that sort of thing. So
Yeah.
what we is that yes, it's good, but I do get some questions because now being an entrepreneur is a business. People are serial entrepreneurs. We have Colin Chapman, who we've been with in Fort Lauderdale for 5 weeks. He's got 3 or 4 different businesses, but his book he's just written is Start, Scale, Exit, Repeat.
Yeah.
His book.
It is a lot easier now, and there's a lot more money available for that. There's a lot more funding. Interest rate is actually low compared to where you
Yes.
were in the 80s. I mean, it's a completely different story, even though people are complaining about it. The way that you grew the business, it gives you so much more prop just because of all these challenges. And this has been really fascinating, and I really encourage everybody to read the book, and maybe just as much of a storybook as the business book. And I agree with that 100%, Joe. Really appreciate your time.
Well, I appreciate our conversation, Dennis. It's been great, and I'm sure we'll be up there again because we know JT quite well now, and I'm sure we'll be up at a lot of his events.